So today on Trek Wars, we're going to be taking a look at the Federation fleet composition during the Dominion War. So one of the things that I've seen many times with many of these other kind of videos that are similar in this manner is they always seem to have the perfect ship and the perfect scenario, which that's not usually what you get during war. You have to work with what you have. And so we're going to look at it through those eyes rather than the perfect fleet. We're going to look at what we see on screen and kind of the dynamics and the reasoning behind it. So we'll be taking a look at all the different kinds of ships from the TNG era leading up to the Dominion War. Alright, that being said, let's go. Alright, so first off, we'll be taking like the ships that are going to be the front line. It's going to be a lot of Excelsiors in my opinion. We're also going to have some of the Constellation class starships. Now, the reason I say a lot of the Excelsiors and Constellations are going to be in the front is because the Constellation class is a heavily armed starship for patrol duties, and so is the Excelsior. Now, some of our more stranger ships, like the Freedom class, that is a short-range patrol ship, but they have been modified since the 2360s to have more advanced technology, and they're able to stay at warp speeds which would be acceptable during the Dominion War. So they are coming from the Ambassador class, which is a combat oriented starship, and so their armor level is higher than what normal starships would say of the Golden Era would be. So they're slightly more combat oriented, even though their technology is that in-between stage. So we'll just kind of take a look at the Freedom class. So the Freedom class is a crew of 370, can go warp 9.2. It's 430 meters, so it's a pretty big ship. It's over 200 million metric tons. Now it has a Lance phaser cannon, and it has 8 Type 8 phasers, and it has 2 torpedo launchers, which are second generation. So that means that they're going to be hitting much harder than a Kirk era, which is a first generation torpedo launcher. Now, this is one of the hardest to get down because there are so many variants of the Excelsior. So we'll just kind of make it real brief and real simple. So there are Excelsiors that are more modern that would say ambassadors and stuff would be aboard, and special delegates during the TNG era. And they would be equipped with second generation torpedo launchers. They would have 2, and they would have a standard of 10 dual Type 9 phaser emitters. Now, the older generation starships are not that far off in the firepower because they have so much. So the older Excelsior variant, let's say the B, Excelsior B we see there, it could have an upwards of 20 emitters on it, and they would be Type 8. And it has 4 first generation torpedo launchers. And when I say first generation torpedo launchers, we are talking about Captain Kirk era. Second generation torpedo era is referring to TNG caliber torpedoes, which are significantly stronger. And then you'll hear me talk about burst fire. Burst fire means they can fire more than 1 photon torpedo. With Starfleet ships, it's usually 3, but the Constitution class is stated that it can launch up to 6 photon torpedoes per spread. So it does have burst fire. So it has, I believe, 4 to 2, depending on how you look at it, because its torpedo launchers are capable of launching forward and back. And so sometimes it's said to have actually 4, when in reality it only has 2. They're just like the same torpedo launchers that are seen on the Reliant. They can fire forward and backwards. So these ships are mostly making the front line, not really because of the firepower. It's decent firepower, but it's mostly making it there because these ships can take a hit, and when their shields go down, they can stay in a fight longer than some of the other frigates. Alright, so next on our list, we're going to take a look at some of the Federation new generation frigates. Alright, so now let's take a look at some of those more newer ships, those smaller frigates that are out there, and we'll just kind of take a look at them, and we'll take a look at, obviously, the Springfield class, which is a relatively small starship. So the Springfield class is only 325 meters. It carries only 8 Type 9 phasers, and it has 2 torpedo launchers. They are second generation, so it can bring a little bit of long distance firepower, but for the most part, its shielding is subpar and its armor level is pretty low. So these ships are going to be staying back further from the front line and probably using their torpedo launchers to deal the damage that's necessary. Now, the Cheyenne class, now that's not that's still a pretty small ship too. It's slightly bigger, but it's 362 meters. Now, the ship has only 6 Type 9 phaser arrays. Phaser array Type 9s are pretty decent firepower, but it's somewhat outdated. Now, but what it's going to be able to do is why this ship is in that protective line, not in the very, very front, is because it's got 2 torpedo burst fire launchers, which are second generation. So that means it can bring a lot of firepower through its torpedoes. Now, the ship's not very big, and it's going to run out of torpedoes relatively quickly during engagements, but it can still deliver a significant amount of damage for a ship of its size. Now, the armor of both of these ships is very low. They can't take much of a hit once their shields go down. Their shields are average. They're even weaker than the newer generation Excelsiors. These are really small ships. They're explorers. They're really never meant for combat. But like I said, you've got to deal with what you've got. Now, some of the things that you guys will notice is these numbers are different than some of the ones that are in the videos that are the full breakdown. The reason is I was just giving Type 10 phasers to all ships that resembled or had Galaxy class parts at all. After reviewing that, I realized that that can't be true because Type 10 phasers were never seen during the border wars, and they weren't aware of ships of that caliber or strength. So there's no way that any of these ships would have actually had Type 10 phasers, and they would not have shields that would have been equivalent to a Galaxy class or anything that. And I don't even think that they would have the multi-shot capabilities that you would see on a Galaxy class. It would be maybe 3 torpedoes per burst shot, which is significantly less than what a Galaxy class or a Nebula is doing. So these ships are not garbage, but they're not really going to hold the line that long, and that's why the Excelsiors are more in the front. Alright, so in our Frontline fleet, we're going to take a look at the second line of the Frontline fleet, and you'll see that we'll have advanced ships like the Intrepid, which is bringing a host of firepower, and the extremely well-armored Steamrunner class. Now, these are your hold the line, these are first-generation warships. Alright, so the Intrepid and the Steamrunner are actually true frontline starships. They have really powerful shields. Now, the Intrepid has 3 torpedo launchers, which are second generation, single shot, 1 quantum torpedo, single shot, and it has 14 Type 10 phaser arrays. So that thing is blistering with all kinds of weaponry. Now, its armor is higher than an average Federation starship at this time period, but not of those of the anti-Borg class. Now, next on the list is the Steamrunner. So it's 375 meters. It has only 4 phaser arrays, Type 10, and it has 2 standard torpedo launchers. Now, those are second generation torpedo launchers, and they're not burst fire shot torpedo launchers like the Galaxy class. They're more along the lines of single shot, maybe possibly 2 or 3 at the max. It is possible for these ships to carry quantum torpedoes as well, but I don't really think that they see that very often. So I would deter that standardly they're probably just using standard Fulton torpedoes. Now, the Steamrunner is the best frontline ship that you can ask for the main reason is it has ablative armor, and it has a lot of it. So it doesn't have as much as the Defiant, but it's the next closest thing. So this ship can take a serious beating even when its shields are down. It can stay in a fight for a very, very long time. Now, because it has so much armor, That's probably a main reason why it's so limited when it comes to the amount of phaser arrays it has. But what phase arrays it has, Type 10 phase arrays are fantastic. All right, so the next two are kind of controversial, and that would be the Challenger class and the New Orleans class. And we'll do a breakdown and talk about why that is. All right, so if you guys are familiar with the lure of the Challenger, you know it's a diplomatic vessel, and some of its specifications actually show it to be relatively weak. We're talking about shield levels that are similar to an Excelsior class Kirk era. Its firepower is supposed to be Type 8 phaser arrays. It had very little firepower whatsoever. It could do very little. Now, I don't really agree with that, and I honestly don't think that makes a lot of sense. Now, the Challenger class is developed in 2350, so it's going to be a pretty modern ship. So I would honestly speculate that it really has Type 9 phasers. So it has 6 of them, and it is very close to Galaxy, and it is very, very much a Galaxy generation ship. So I don't agree with the low stats that they give it for the Challenger class shields. I think they would have shields that may not be a Galaxy class level, but they would at least be at the Intrepid level. I think that this is a really powerful ship, and that's why I'm putting it as a frontline ship, because I also think that it would carry modern torpedo launchers. So my opinion about this ship is this is a budget Galaxy class, and that's how I treat it. I don't think this ship is honestly as bad as some of the lore is given on some of the Star Trek channels. They just seem to really think this ship is garbage. And I don't go with that, and I don't think it's correct. I think it would have Intrepid level shielding. It would have pretty standard torpedoes for the time period, second generation, and it's got 6 Type 9 phaser emitters. Now, I don't think this ship is going to have Type 10. I don't really think any of the old generation ships should have Type 10 phaser emitters. I think that that's something that the bigger classes and the next generation ships, like the Defiant, the Norway, and those kind of ships, I think, have those advanced weapons, the pre-Borg generation, basically. Okay, now obviously the New Orleans class was developed in 2340, and then it was a retrofit in 2364. I want to explain why this is a front-end starship when, a lot of people would think that this would probably be not in the front line. Now, its original lure, obviously 340 meters. It's not a very big ship. Relatively the size of the other ships. It's pretty small. It carries 10 Type 9 phaser emitters. So this ship is a gunboat, and it has 3 photon torpedo launchers. Now, these are burst fire torpedo launchers, and I believe that they are second generation. Now, these are all specifications that have been upgraded from its original variant. I don't think that the 2340 variants really are around anymore, and based on the lore I've seen, what had happened is those ships did not perform very well, and they were retrofitted after the Cardassian border war, because these ships originally didn't have 3 multi-shot torpedo launchers. Those were Deep Space Explorer sensor systems. So they're the ship is a Deep Space Explorer originally. It's obviously during the Golden Era, so it's not a warship. So it had Type 8 phaser emitters. It had a lot of them, but that's not a very powerful weapon by especially Dominion standards. And then obviously it would have had 1 or 2, standard second generation torpedo launchers, which is not very impressive. So because of its upgrades after the Borg and the huge losses, the Federation began upgrading their ships and creating a new generation of starships. This is where the New Orleans class really got up in performance. Because of the incident with the Borg, it was decided that they were going to do some improvements aboard the New Orleans class. The New Orleans class had been upgraded because it was one of the newest ship designs. It was one of the easiest to modify and bring up to modern standards. What they had done is after the Borg, they needed ships for the front line, so they upgraded the New Orleans classes. They were completely retrofitted, and they were given either 10 Type 9 phaser emitters, or they were giving 10 Type 10 phaser emitters, and they were given 3 torpedo launchers. So the original Deep Space sensor probes, the three probes that were located aboard the ship, were now retrofitted into multi-shot torpedo heads. So these ships would probably be able to fire at least 3 shots per module, giving them the ability to launch 9 torpedoes. Alright, so now let's take a look at the next set. Alright, and so now we're going to save the best for last, and that's obviously going to be the Ambassador and then the Niagara class. And so we'll break them down and we'll take a look at them because those would be some of your best front-end starships that you could have, or frontline starships. Okay, so we'll take a look at the Ambassador class, which is built in the 2320s. It's very old. It was built up till 2330. So it didn't really have a very large run. There's not that many of these ships built. They're 526 meters. They're very, very large. They're capable of warp 8.4. Now, their offensive capabilities is they do have 8 Type 7 phaser arrays, and they do have the first generation multi-shot torpedo launcher, but it is more advanced than some of the torpedo launchers that we were talking about. It could fire probably about 5 times rather than 3. Now, the reason why this ship is making it onto this list, even though it has pretty much subpar offensive capabilities, is its defenses are phenomenal. Now, its shielding, even though the ship is really old, they put a lot into the shielding. The shielding would have been equivalent to that of an Intrepid class, which is very impressive. And then once its shields go down, it has thick armor. It's really, really strong. It was a combat-oriented ship. Remember, the Ambassador class, during its generation, was able to take on 3 Romulan warbirds of its generation. And yes, it lost, but still, it was able to destroy one. I think the other one was badly injured. But my point is because of its shielding and its armor, and then obviously it's using phaser arrays or new technology during that time, the ship was able to hold its own. So yes, this ship would definitely be used during the front end. It's a front of the line starship, and it's mostly because of its ability to withstand attacks. It's got powerful shields, and it's got powerful armor. Okay, so the Niagara class is same thing. It's 565, it's really large, it's really heavy, it's a large ship, it's over 300 million metric tons. It can go warp 9.6, it's fast, can cruise at 8. So it's got even more phaser arrays. It's got 12 instead of the 8. So it's got a lot more firepower than its predecessor. It's built upon some of the same technology. It has first generation multi-shot torpedo technology. Now, the reason why it's using Type 7 phase arrays, it's got new Galaxy class engines. This ship was designed for test bedding technology. Very few of them were designed. You're not going to see them very often. And so it was a bridge between old and new technology and experimenting to see what they could and cannot do. Honestly, the design was not super successful. It kind of just phased out. So they're there, but they weren't really built in mass or anything. So you're not going to see them very often. Okay, and you can basically keep everything that I said about the first Ambassador. I didn't bother putting the stats on this one because it's pretty much the same. So there were Ambassador classes that had been upgraded throughout the time, especially after the battle with the Borg. You would see Ambassadors that would be hosting Type 9 phaser emitters. Now, they wouldn't be going all the way up to Type 10. The design, the ships, the specifications, it's just too old. It would never be able to hold that technology. But they did get them up to Type 9 phaser arrays. So that would give them, a decent amount of firepower. They have the multi-shot standard torpedo launchers. Not super impressive, but it's better than nothing. But Type 9 phasers, and then the amount of shielding this thing would have had, it would have been a really good frontline starship. So our frontline ships, these would be our command ships. Now, just so we all understand what I'm talking about, this being the front end of the Federation arsenal. Now, these are the ships that are just going to, take a lot of the damage. And the way that they're distributed is to compensate for their strengths and their weaknesses. All right, so let's kind of get a big picture of all the things I've been kind of talking about here. So there are several layers to Federation fleets, and this video is only talking about the front-end starships, so the very top ships at the top here. Okay, so let's kind of look at it. So your front end, there's kind of like 3 layers here. So the first layer is your expendable ships. These are ships that are kind of older, they can still hold up. And then your second line is the line that's going to hold the line, right? These are the ships that have stronger shields, they have better weapons, they can stay there longer. And then the ships behind them in your front line are kind of more for just support. So if small ships do get past these lines of these ships, they try to attack those prime targets that are in the back, that third layer should be able to take out those ships. And also, your Cheyenne classes are modern torpedo launchers, and so you could bring a lot of forced power to the battlefield from the front ends by keeping those ships not in the very front of the front end. So that's the kind of idea I have, is that you kind of use your lemmings to soak up damage. In the middle there of your front line is your heavy hitters, and then behind the heavy hitters are your more fragile starships, the ones that can't take a huge beating but are still bringing a significant amount of firepower to the battlefield, that they're not obsolete by any means. So this is basically the kind of structure that I would imagine the Federation would be using. And like I said, I don't have tons of ships here that are the new generation sitting in the front line. I only have the steam runners because there'd be very limited amounts of those ships, and you'd only put them in a position where you're expecting it to crumble, and then you want something to back that area up. So as you can see, I try to distribute it based on power projection and make it more even so that you don't have a weakness completely in your front line. Okay, so obviously the back line, the blue line that you see there, what that is those are Federation starships that don't have great shielding. They have moderate firepower, but they are going to collapse quickly. And then obviously the middle is the gold area. Those are your ships that are going to hold the line the longest. They have some of the best firepower, or they have the best shielding and armor, either or. But the point is, they're going to be able to hold that area the longest. Now your ships at the top, those are the ships that are unfortunately red officers. They're expendable. Those are ships that are going to take the most damage during the engagements. You're going to lose them, and those are the ships that are okay to be lost during a battle. All right, if you like this, then we can, this video does well, then we'll go ahead and we'll take a look at the other dynamics of the Federation fleets. So if you've liked this video, give me a thumbs up, make a comment, tell me what you like, something you don't like, if you agree, disagree. If you think there's some kind of mistake in here, let me know. I can make some alterations. I will be probably doing videos about all the different ships again after I get my data tables refixed. Thank you for watching Trek Wars. If you like this material, please subscribe and make a comment. And with that being said, victory is life.